Hey there, listener. Welcome to the Deep Share podcast. I'm your host, Andy Rouse, and for the last couple of decades, I've slowly been opening my eyes to a very different world than the one I grew up hearing about. And the more conversations I have with interesting people, the more mystifying this world becomes. So without further ado, let's get deep.
We've got science to celebrate! Demons bliss out! After what, baby? Come on!
There is rebellion in the wind. It will be crushed.
Everything I've said is true. It's real.
Dinosaur fossils? God put those here to test our faith.
A damn lie. I saw them with my own eye.
Did IQs just drop sharply while I was away?
We did illusions, man! None of it is true!
I'm not insane.
This is mass madness, you maniacs! In God's name, you people are the real thing! We are the illusion!
Welcome back to the Deep Share podcast. I'm Andy Rouse, and I'm here with Chaz of the Dead for, I believe, the third time or the fourth time. I can't remember. But either way, you keep coming back, and I keep asking you back, man, because you're awesome. How you doing, dude?
Oh, breathing air. Glad to be here on planet Earth and enjoying this spin. How you doing?
That's good. That's good. I'm doing well, man. But you got to be careful with that air, because I hear from like news sources that like air is bad for you.
They're
water,
putting chemicals in it. It's turning the frogs gay.
They're already there. So we haven't hung out in a while. I think the last time we did, we were doing like a witness episode back in the day, which was fun.
Oh, yeah.
Those are always fun, jamming out to some psychedelics mixed with the paranormal, which I'm sure we'll brush up against tonight. But I wanted to have you back on specifically because you have a new book out, and that's very exciting. And it's called A Place Between Time and Space. And that's fucking epic, man. So tell us a little bit about this. Tell us about the book and how it came about.
Yeah, I'm glad you liked the title. I initially wanted to call it Haunted Balls, but my editor put the kibosh on that. And I'll
okay, so
that's
the unofficial name, right? So we'll just leave that as the unofficial name.
That's gonna be the unofficial name, Haunted Balls. Florida paranormal story. But no, it's a place between time and space, a true story of UFOs, ghosts, and Florida's strangest home. And it, I guess the case at the center of this research that I ended up doing is a case that some people in ufology and some of your niche nerds might recognize, and that's the Betz Sphere case. And that occurred in 1974, just north of Jacksonville, Florida, where this family, the Betz family, discovered this strange metal sphere. And they brought it home thinking maybe it was a historical artifact because this island they live on has lots of history, as we'll get into. But they brought it home thinking maybe it's a cannonball or some other kind of historical item. It was a little polished, so it didn't really look old, but it was interesting. And so they brought it home, and there's differing reports, whether they found it in a fire, in the center of a fire on the island, or in a circle of burnt foliage, or if it was just placed there. There's alternate stories. And again, this is something that's going to pop up a couple times during this story. But they brought it home, and it sat in the adult son Terry's room for about 2 weeks, just as a normal metal sphere. And one day he began to play his acoustic guitar in the room, and the sphere had this reaction to it. It started to kind of hum and whistle and vibrate. And soon afterwards, it started to move on its own, of its own power. It would follow people around the home, kind of like following them around corners, and seemingly navigate the stairs and the levels and things like that, really in this bizarre manner, and in a way that showed some kind of intelligence. And the family became convinced that it was either itself intelligent or it was controlled by some intelligence. And thinking, wow, this is neat. They showed their neighbors, and their neighbors were like, well, that's strange. And soon it hit the local press. and local TV showed up, local radio. One witness who gave an interview recently about this, seeing the sphere, Ron Kravitz. He ran this late night Jacksonville paranormal radio show, kind of like a local coast to coast, back in the day when terrestrial radio was the thing. And so he had this reputation as kind of the local UFO expert. And so Jerry Betz had invited him out to the home. She was the matriarch of this family, and she was a character in her own right. And she's one of the main characters in this telling of the story in my book. But she was a industrious woman. She owned a real estate company and a trucking company. Again, in the 70s, when it was a tough time to be a lady and much tougher to be a lady businesswoman. But she also ran for state Congress. There's this horrible news article on the record of it says, how will these women keep house if they're elected to state Congress, is the headline of this article. It kind of gives you an idea of the obstacles she was in this time period. But she had heard about this spooky house out on Fort George Island when discussing a film project, and she decided that she had to live into this crazy, unique home that was almost as unique as she was. So she moved into this home, and this is where the bulk of this sphere story occurred. But she invites Ron Kravitz over to see the sphere, and Ron says that, he went into the house, saw this crazy home, wanted to take more pictures of it because the home is more of a castle, really. And as they're going out to the backyard to take more photos, the sphere, which was sitting in the middle of this flat glass table, it rolls to the edge of the table and kind of dangles off in this gravity defying way, and kind of like wiggles at them as almost to say, like, hey, don't forget me. Like, I want to go outside. If everyone else is going outside, like, I want to go with you. Almost like a cat or a dog. And interestingly, the family's toy poodle hated the sphere. It would freak out if it was held near it. It really was uncomfortable with this sphere.
Gotta listen to your pets, people. They know they're trying to communicate.
Well, despite this, the family kind of grew this affinity towards it. They kind of like adopted it as a second pet. They really kind of enjoyed having this weird sphere hanging out and moving around.
I could just hear them. You're gonna have to get used to it. All right, he lives here too.
They're like, it's cute, it's fun. It wasn't doing anything spooky or dangerous. It was just following people around and moving on its own. It's almost kind of like a pet robot. Or someone from another podcast compared it to what the Thing from Addams Family. Just kind of hanging out.
Yeah, maybe doing some tasks.
Weird little guy. He hangs out. And Ron Kravitz to this day recalls seeing this incident. There's no doubt in his mind that this, something was going on. That sphere moved on its own. There was no tricks, nothing going. It's clearly, moved around like it was intelligent. Yeah. And scores of other witnesses came to the home and confirmed what the family had been saying. Even one witness who worked for the Smithsonian came to the house and saw it move around and shit. And he was just a photographer. So it never made it further up in the Smithsonian, but he was like, oh yeah, you've got a genuine mystery here. I don't know what that is. And eventually outside party, the story got national attention and it kind of blew up, and outside parties started showing interest. First, the Navy, who has a base on the island just south of Fort George Island. They have Mayport Station here. And the whole area surrounding this island is part of this Mayport naval complex. There's an air base. There's several, battleships and destroyers stationed there. It's a significant base right there on the East Coast. And her husband worked as a contractor engineer for the Navy as well. So there was already some kind of connections there. And she drew up this, being the clever businesswoman on top of her stuff. She drew up this contract and made the Navy sign it that said if it wasn't dangerous and it wasn't theirs, like their technology, that they had to return it. And after running some tests on it, the Navy got back to her and said, yeah, there's definitely something weird on the inside of this ball. Like, the first x-rays weren't strong enough. We had to get a second x-ray machine to really see inside it. And yeah, there definitely seems to be some kind of, a smaller inner spheres inside this. And when they went to return the sphere, as a close member of the family tells the story, this captain who had been liaisoning between the family and the Navy, he brought the sphere back. He was like, yep, you got something weird on your hands. Like, this is a strange sphere. And the family gets a call at the home while this captain, right before he arrives, saying, have this guy call the naval station right away when he gets there. And the guy hands over the sphere and then makes this call, and he gets chewed out. Now, Jerry can't hear what is being said on the other end of the phone, but she can tell by the change of his manner that he's getting reamed. And afterwards, he hangs up the phone and pleads with her to give them the sphere back. Almost as if someone in the higher brass had been like, what happened to the sphere? You're giving the sphere back? Don't give the sphere, kind of this blunder. And that after she refuses to give the sphere back, the Navy releases a different report to the media saying, oh yeah, there's nothing to see here, nothing going on with that sphere. Totally mundane piece of technology. It's perfectly balanced though, so if you tap it just the slightest, it'll move around, and that's probably what's going on there.
Interesting.
So the Navy releases two different reports, one privately to the family and one publicly, kind of debunking it. The public, local media, they find a guy who works in manufacturing who's like, I recognize that ball. It looks like these ones we use in these giant pump gauges. It, blocks up the gauge when it's flowing a certain direction. They use it in paper mills, and I've got one here that kind of looks like it. And so the media seized on that, and years later, Skeptoid, the podcast, did a whole thing where they found like an artist who was using these kind of spheres in an art project, and he says he lost one somewhere in Jacksonville, and that must be what they found. And they did their whole the thing skeptics like to do. They put the stamp on it and said, case closed.
Done.
Nothing to see here. Bada bing, bada boom, done with it.
So typical.
Yeah, very, very typical. And that's kind of how the case is treated today. People are like, oh, it was a weird hoax this family tried to perpetuate. And interestingly, though, this was around the time where Jerry Betz had flipped on the whole thing. And when these debunkings started being published, she was like, thank God. Because what she thought was just a bizarre, weird thing to find in the woods ended up really hurting her businesses. She had a phone line at the house that was constantly ringing, and she had a trucking company and a real estate company, but now the phone was getting clogged with UFO investigators and reporters and MUFONs and all these NICAP and all these people just constantly calling her. We're at the point where at night she just have to leave the phone off the hook so she could sleep. And she was missing business calls. UFO investigators were just showing up at her house unannounced, knocking on the door, being like, hey, where's the sphere? I'm here to discover it. Someone from the Pleiades sent me. And I'm, again, the stuff we still deal with today.
Wow.
She became kind of a central focus for this month. And so when these debunkings came out, she was like, okay, cool, fine. But she still wanted to know what this sphere was. And then so she turned to the National Enquirer, who had set up this panel to they said they would give $10,000 to anyone who could have definitive proof of UFOs or extraterrestrials. And she didn't give a shit about the money. She was very successful. She didn't need any. 10 grand was not much as far as she was concerned. Mm-hmm. But the panel was filled with famous ufologists, people we know now to be famous ufologists, but prime time scientists. There was Harder, Leo Sprinkle, and most notably J. Allen Hynek, who was heading this panel. And they sent Terry and one of their other sons to New Orleans to meet this panel with the sphere. And that's where something strange occurred. So right when they hand over the sphere for testing, they do this brief little press conference, and it's recorded. You can hear Terry Betz talking about how he found the sphere, and its shape. You can see the sphere sitting in front of them while they're doing this little press conference. And shortly afterwards, they hand the sphere over for the scientists to start doing these tests on it. But the panel receives this panicked phone call from Jacksonville. And the voice on the line says it's Jerry Betz, and there's an emergency, and that Terry and their other son need to fly home immediately. And so Terry frantically tries to get a hold of his mom on the phone after someone from the panel relays this to them. And he doesn't get her. And knowing that she would leave the phone off the hook at times to, just get a moment of peace and quiet, he assumed that must be happening. He boarded the first flight home, and New Orleans to Jacksonville, maybe like an hour, not very far flight. Got there, drove out to Fort George Island because it's a ways away from the city. It's a bit of a trip. Gets there, and his mom's like, what are you doing here? Where's the sphere? What happened? And he's like, oh, we left the sphere. We thought it was an emergency. And she was like, you left the sphere? Go back there, get the sphere. This is some kind of ruse. And so they flew back to New Orleans, grabbed the sphere, and walked out of the test. They were like, no, we're done. You guys tried to cheat us, because they figured it was the panel trying to save the 10 grand. Coming up with some kind of ruse, and so they could mess with it and whatever. And Hynek felt like this was a huge misunderstanding. He actually ended up flying out to the home and meeting with the family, and they got to know him and seemed to enjoy his presence. But what neither party knew at the time was that John Keel, a few years earlier, had experienced the exact same kind of phantom phone call, doppelganger impersonators during his research into the Mothman case. And a lot of these high strangeness cases seem to have that strange telephone impersonator, and sometimes even people impersonating in person at conferences and showing up and asking witnesses questions, posing as an investigator. So this was actually a pretty strange piece of high strangeness if we're taking both parties' words for it at face value that they had nothing to do with it. It might be another piece of evidence towards that high strangeness.
Yeah, that is curious, because they clearly, they would have had to acknowledge that they passed that message along to her, right?
Well, yeah, and so this was all at the panel's expense. The National Enquirer paid for those plane tickets,
wow.
So you can make the argument they were saving, they still saved a bunch of money by not having to pay them 10 grand if it was a real UFO. But come on, no one expects those panels to pay out. That there's a million other ways to have welshed out of that bet than coming up with this kind of personal ruse. There's a family emergency. And again, Hynek felt so bad about this misunderstanding. He the home and actually had the sphere flown out to a third location to have it tested. But there's this story that comes from friends of the family that J. Allen Hynek, while he was staying at the house, was caught in the middle of the night messing with the sphere. Really? And there's a story that perhaps he swapped it out for a fake, or somehow stole it. Another version is that the family gave it to him willingly, as hey, you look after this. And most of this stems actually from Hynek's son, who gave an interview really recently promoting the Project Blue Book TV show. They were doing it's not a documentary, it's one of those reenactment shows, but it's about good. Basic Hynek. Oh, I haven't seen it. I don't know.
They got Lord Baelish from Game of Thrones playing Hynek. It's very interesting. He actually doesn't do a bad job.
Check it out. Well,
but, it's on the History Channel, right? So how much can you trust? I don't know.
Okay, well there you go. But Hynek's son was doing promo for this, and
Yeah, I saw
someone
that.
asked him, "What do you remember from growing up in a UFO house?" And he's like, "Oh, there was some weird stuff." And he offhandedly mentions kicking around this metal sphere from a UFO case in Florida. And this kind of spurred off all of these. Oh, he's talking about the Betz Sphere, and it kind of in this super niche little community spurred off this, discussions on this sphere, and the idea that Hynek somehow wound up with it. Now, the sphere he describes it as a little different in size, and he doesn't really remember any other details about when it showed up or anything that can really corroborate that. But combined with the story of Hynek messing with it in the middle of the night, it becomes very interesting. Either way, by the end of this month, after the Navy, after Hynek, after the panel, and after all of the press, the media had debunked the sphere. It was fake as far as they were concerned. The Navy had these all differing reports, and we really aren't sure what Hynek ended up discovering. There's one discussion he had later with fellow panelist Harder. I want to say Christopher, but I don't think that's right. One of the Harders. And Harder believed that there was something strange with the sphere, but Hynek was arguing that there wasn't anything going on with this sphere. And this debate there's a lot of shady sources around all of this. Again, it gets really murky about who said what, who believed what. But Jerry Betz believed by the end of this month, someone had fucked with the sphere. Someone had messed with it, and it wasn't behaving the way it used to be. She thought it was
fake,
either maybe
maybe
swapped out with a fake,
yeah,
or that something was wrong with it. And she had it x-rayed again, and it showed different the interior mechanisms, these three interior spheres. One of them appeared to have been pulverized. There was only two of them, and now this dust sitting on the inside. So it seemed that something had happened to it. Again, either swapped out with a fake or altered or messed with in some way. Combined with the hits she was taking on the business, she ran yep, it's a hoax, we're done talking about it. And to this day, she still doesn't talk about the case. She's still alive. She paints. She's a wonderful painter. She does like scenes of like southern vistas, swamps, and stuff like that. Nice. But she has no comment to make about the sphere case. It was, for her, it was one really weird, stressful month in a very storied life, where she accomplished a lot of other shit, and the sphere was just one strange thing. And so this was the story as I knew it. And there's actually a great documentary podcast called Oddball that really gets into the details. It was done by Lindsay Kilbride. She was really helpful with researching this project. Her research is phenomenal on this podcast. It's 5 episodes, and it gets into the case, but it's from that journalistic perspective of like, what happened? Was this fake? Kind of thing like this. I hear this story and I'm like, well, this woman clearly has no motive to lie about this sphere. She's experiencing this high strangeness that is essentially ruining her life. Again, it's always well, it was a hoax. They did it for fame, but these people rarely get any fame and only end up getting really harassed. And
it's uncomfortable fame at best,
it's not like Travis Walton's a millionaire. They bring him at the MUFON wheels about every year to do a quick talk, but he's not a millionaire. He's not well off because of his experience. It's not a beneficial, thing to hoax.
No, never.
So, I was looking at this project. Well, okay, there's this weird sphere and it moves around. Let's find out more. And the very first thing I found out that really intrigued me was that there was already a second file, if you will, of paranormal activity about the house where this sphere was located, where the sphere did most of its moving around. And I discovered that how very often this happens, that the ghost hunting community and the UFO community, they haven't been talking. And it seems like in the 70 or the 40 odd years since the 70s, none of them have discussed this case with each other. Because the house that Jerry Betz lived in the ghost hunting community, had become known as the Neff House. And so that's when I started to dig into the history of this place. And when I went out to find it and see this house for my first attempt, I couldn't find it. I asked around, I asked the local park agents. They weren't really sure what house I was talking about. They sent me to this other house that wasn't it. And eventually, on a return trip, I had used some satellite images and found a location, essentially, and crisscrossed these trails until I found one that led in that direction. And when I walked up on this house, it was almost immediate. I go to a lot of haunted locations and paranormal places, but very rarely is one, we walk up to and you're like, oh shit. Like this is strange. This is a weird one. And
like energy immediately, or like just something in the air.
And it really does have it. It's first of all, it's built onto a hill, and there's very few hills here in Florida. That in itself makes it unique. It's built onto Mount Cornelia, which is the highest point in Duval County, the county that encapsulates Jacksonville. And so it's literally house on haunted hill. So this island has a long history of occupation. So it was occupied by the Timucuan tribe for thousands of years. And when you drive through the island, you're driving through these shell middens. You can see the oyster shells stacked together and packed up. And there's speculation that Mount Cornelia itself, probably a good bit of it, is human constructed, added on to this slope. So you have your cliche, your poltergeist cliche Indian burial ground. So later, it's in the 1500s, it's where Jean Ribault, the French explorer, landed. And it's credited as the location where the first Protestant prayer in North America was prayed, which obviously, no matter your beliefs, has some pretty heavy occult implications. In its own right. And again, he did this prayer on an occupied island. They were like a bunch of Native Americans standing around watching him do this and erect this pillar that was supposed to be the southern marker for the French territory in the New World.
I'm surprised they didn't fuck him up.
So the Native Americans didn't, but a few years later, the Spanish did. They landed 45 miles south at what today is St. Augustine. And they marched an army overland during this hurricane and arrived at France's Fort Caroline, which was somewhere near Fort George Island. They're not sure exactly where it was because there's nothing remains. But Mount Cornelia being the highest location is, your prime suspect. That's where you probably would build your fort. The Spanish marched this army, and at the same time, the French were sailing south to do this sneak attack on St. Augustine. And while they were kind of passing each other, this hurricane hits. And the hurricane blows the French fleet way far south. They shipwreck. They lose most of their gear and their horses and cannons and shit. And they're basically don't know how far they've gone, and they're marching back north, hoping that they aren't going to run into the Spanish. Meanwhile, the Spanish showed up to an unguarded Fort Caroline, massacre pretty much everyone. One shipload of people escapes. And on this ship is an engraver, and it's from his engraved panels that we know this story. And then the rest from the Spanish, because the Spanish massacre them. They go back to St. Augustine, and they hear that there's a bunch of the natives, there's a bunch of unarmed French dudes walking along the beach to the south. and they go down and they massacre them at this point that to this day is called Matanza Point, Massacre Point in Spanish. And so all of these locations have these early colonial ghost stories, especially that area where these massacres occurred, associated with them. You know, all kinds of ghost hunters go out there and get EVPs in Spanish, and you know, all kinds of weird stories. There's a super strange poltergeist story from North Carolina where John Ribault set up his second French fort. And so he set up this was supposed to be the area between North Carolina and North Florida, was supposed to be the French colony before the British and Spanish showed up and wiped those dudes out.
Right.
But this fort was actually wiped out by Native Americans. And this poltergeist claimed to be he was a jester. He was a dwarf and a jester stationed at this fort, which is already a strange and unlikely story. But that's what this poltergeist claimed to be. And he haunts this house, and supposedly to this day, that occupied this land that used to be near this French fort. So the island, Fort George Island, where this house is located and where this sphere was found, from the get has these weird associations, right? There was the Native American religion that occurred there that there's no records recorded, but there was a Spanish mission on the island converting the locals there. And they did record that they would do rituals. They had these strange black drinks they would consume, and they would do these rituals living on the island. And of course, as the Spanish lived there, the population decreased over time pretty rapidly after the Spanish moved in for a lot of the natives of that area. Right. And the Timucuan tribe very quickly succumbed to illness and evaporated or morphed into, got absorbed by other tribes, mainly the Seminole in the region. But at the Spanish mission and some native settlements continued on the island for a couple hundred years before it was turned into a plantation. And it became a large plantation, and it was by the time it was purchased by Zephaniah Kingsley. And to this day, you can still go out there and see Kingsley's plantation. It's 2 plantation houses still stand there. The island's covered in these tabby stone ruins that were homes for the slaves and sharecroppers who lived on the island after slavery. Wow. And Zephaniah Kingsley, super weird dude. People who went and visited him reported that in his dining hall, it was all the walls were covered with these massive portraits of naked black women. And he had this super unique opinion of the time that mixed race people were actually more superior than white people and black people. He thought that, which very progressive in a weird way,
yeah,
for his time period, that like the mixed race person was superior. And so he really thrived under this Spanish system of slavery, which Florida was still under, which pretty much your rights were based on how light your skin color was.
Right.
And it's this, yeah, it's like this colorist thing actually still really exists today in like Mexico and Colombia and shit, where
wow.
Like people will, like, if someone's darker skinned, they're like, oh yeah, he's black, and they're like, no, he's Mexican, all of you guys are Mexican, and they're like, no, he's a white Mexican and he's a black Mexican, and it's this weird divide.
Wow.
But that suited Kingsley well because he married a bunch of slaves and had a bunch of mixed race children, and he wanted those children to inherit his plantations and inherit his property, which they could under the Spanish rule. But then the U.S. purchased Florida from Spain, and suddenly his mixed race children were as equal to his darkest slave from Africa, and to him that was crazy and wild. but he was also he also adopted this I believe it was Senegalese religion, this native tribal religion. He didn't believe in Christianity, which again made him unpopular. Another reason he was unpopular amongst the other plantation owners. But he married several African women under this Senegalese tradition, one of which, Anna Kingsley, became kind of like the leader of her own plantations and really was in charge of a large swath of his businesses.
Wow.
Not to say he was a good guy,
No.
because there's a really fascinating incident where the U.S. had purchased Florida at this time, and the transatlantic slave trade had ceased. So you could still trade slaves in the U.S. You know, if your slaves had kids, you could sell those kids as slaves, but you couldn't bring any fresh slaves from Africa, supposedly. So there's this manifest from the Coast Guard, or the Navy at the time, because the Coast Guard hadn't really been set up, where they stopped this slave ship coming in, bunch of 300 slaves from Africa, totally illegal at this time. And they're like, well, where are you going? And they're like, well, Kingsley Plantation. Zephaniah Kingsley bought all these people and he's having them shipped in. And the Navy at the time is like, well, it's 300 people. We don't have barracks or food or even just space for that many people. So they let the slave ship go to Fort George Island, land at Kingsley Plantation.
It's like nothing they
and
can
they
do about
literally,
it.
yeah, well, they gave him a slap on the wrist. They were like, don't do this again.
Okay.
Like, you can have this batch of slaves, these 300
They were probably
people,
on his dime, you know. Like they were
well,
probably
yeah,
paying
there's
off
certainly
anyway.
some corruption going on, but yeah, they officially, like on the record, gave him a slap on the wrist, like, don't do it again.
That's amazing.
But yeah, so he absolutely, which an interesting kind of detail is, he not only supported but was totally okay with his slaves having this free time. They worked hours. He ran it more like a factory than, you know, a lot of the plantation owners, because again, he viewed them as having more rights based on their skin color.
God. So they were treated like children at school. That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense, actually.
Yeah. Again, very strange, but he did have this system where, you know, you worked your shift, and then afterwards, if you wanted to go catch fish and sell the fish or whatever, you were allowed to do that. And eventually you could buy your freedom from him if you earned enough on the side. But as part of that, he also allowed the slaves to practice their own religions and things like that. And so again, you have another kind of occult presence introduced to the island. It's really a hodgepodge, a mixture of what ends up becoming the Santeria, the Palo Santo, the menagerie of occult practices that are now, you know, synonymous with the Caribbean. Your hoodoos, your voodoos. Yeah. Where it's these native traditions mixing with these African traditions, mixing with, you know, the fist of the church who imposes these saints and other icons. And as any good occultist does, they roll with it. They mix it and they mash it, and whatever works they keep, and whatever
chaos
doesn't
magic.
work, it's tossed. Yeah, it's that core tenet of chaos magic, which drives the traditional magics forward. And so this island is essentially a breeding ground for it. And so it's not surprising that soon after the Civil War and sharecropping and Tom Crow, around this time period, spooky stories start to pop up around the island. Phantom dogs, women in white. Some people say it's Anna Kingsley showing up to harass the descendants of the slaves that she used to own. You know, there's this ghostly white peacock that's said to bring good luck. But the most interesting story is the story of Old Red Eyes. And the story goes that old Red Eyes, it's almost Freddy Krueger's backstory.
Nice.
He was a child murderer. He was a slave, but he killed other slave children. And so he was lynched by his fellow slaves. Of course, when I first heard that story, I was like, well, that sounds like white guilt, like framing this story. But after learning about Zephaniah Kingsley and how he operated his plantation, that story's probably truer than one might give it initial credit for. Right. And the story is that a pair of glowing red eyes, this demonic set of eyes, is how this serial killer's ghost appears. And people have been reporting that set of red eyes for over a century, and decades before the house is even built on Mount Cornelia, and a century before Jerry Betz moves in. And of course, those who know their paranormal stuff will bring it back to Mothman again, the red eye. The common archetype.
That's what I was thinking. It sounds like the ultra terrestrial stories that you hear about. Always the red eyes, or something about hypnotic eyes. It's always that.
Well, yeah, and I had an experience with a set of red eyes when I was a kid that kind of led me down this path. We've probably talked about that in a previous episode.
Yeah, we have.
If you go back and find it. But the short is, my brother and I both saw the set of red eyes one night, and cartoonish almost now when I think about it, flaming at the edges, almost a Halloween graphic. But it was seen by my brother on a separate occasion, and to this day it was clear as day. It's not a simple illusion. And
did it feel like it was implanted? Like, did it feel like some sort of like Matrixy type thing, where suddenly you were seeing beyond the veil or something? When you say it like it looked like a cartoon, almost like a logo or something like that, it just I don't know. It feels like interdimensional or something.
Yeah, well, so I don't really know. Because it occurred in our childhood bedroom, and it's not like we lived in a haunted house or anything.
Right.
It was just one night I fell out of bed, saw this pair of red eyes underneath the bed staring back at me. I hopped back under the covers, safe till morning. As you're a kid, that's how kid logic works.
Oh yeah.
And the next morning, I figured it was some kind of light from maybe a toy or something, and I just was confused because it was late at night and I had seen it this way. My older brother sees what I'm doing and asked me without me saying or prompting, "Did you see the red eyes too?" I still remember he was freaked out when he asked, and because he had the exact same experience when he was sleeping in that bed a few weeks prior. Wow. And so
creepy.
It's not like the red eyes popped up ever again, though. And so I do kind of tend to believe it was maybe a shared dream or something like that. But even if it was a shared dream, right, that's not supposed to be real. And so that was kind of the moment that convinced me that, oh shit, like something's going on. Either ghosts are real or psychics are real or psychic phenomenon. Something's going on. And it was kind of the genesis of my interest in the subject.
Chaz of the Dead.
Origin story.
Yeah. So go ahead.
I was gonna say, put it in the biopic.
Yeah,
that's how it started.
Damn right, man. Who do you want to play? You just got that. You got to figure that out, and we'll be set. What's your personal take on the the orb situation? I mean, there's so many different interpretations for the paranormal. Of course, you and I have talked about that many times, and how it crosses over into all these other subcategories and other important fields that all feel equally as important. What's your take on this orb story? What do you think it is?
So it's one of those things where the light spheres, that's spherical light archetype, even spherical metal craft, the sphere seems to be something that is one of those trends that is one of the most common ones that pops up in the paranormal. I kind of like to think of it as those like colored tier charts.
Yeah.
And maybe second down from the top tier, those spherical light orbs, because they pop up again and again and again, and they're so real that they're just written off in some instances. Last year I had a chance to go out to Marfa and see some of the Marfa lights. And
what are those? I've never heard of that.
oh, so Marfa, Texas. It's this really weird desert town. It's kind of got this weird artsy community, but it's most known for this weird light phenomenon that seems to hang out around these hills off in the distance. And when you're driving into town coming from the east, there's this Marfa Lights viewing center off the highway, and it's this kind of like rest stop area where if you go at night, you can see these spheres of light. Not every night, but pretty damn consistently. Wow. And so the first night when I went out there, there was this one light off in the distance, and there was a crowd of people out there looking at it. And this one dude was like, "Oh yeah, that's one definitely." And I'm like, "Yeah, whatever, dude. It's just some light. Like, how do you know it's a Marfa light? Like, it could just be a car or a campfire or a flashlight just out there." And then it does this weird loop-de-loop into the sky and kind of darts down and then like fades away in this weird way. And I was like, "Oh fucking shit, that was weird." that certainly wasn't a car. And so the next night, you know, being as how I like to conduct my investigations, I took some magic mushrooms and did kind of a ritual to see if I could get one of these lights to show up and interact with me, you know, fly close. Because that's the stories, is that if you're out at night in that area, these lights might interact with you. One guy told us a story when we were there that he was in a school bus and one of the lights came up to the school bus, and kind of like the Betz Sphere, it showed this intelligence. It went up and down the bus, kind of like checking them out, and then just flew off.
Weird. Again, very much like a Mothman, ultra terrestrial kind of thing, like interested, but not that interested, not trying really to communicate. See you later.
Yeah. It's not really concerned too much with what we understand. It's more curious about what we're doing, what's going on, and then it's back to whatever it's doing.
Right.
So when I did this mushroom experiment, though, the next night there were a ton of lights out. Like there were maybe, instead of just the one that kind of stayed still and did a maneuver and disappeared, there were probably 6 or 7 of them doing all kinds of dances and maneuvers and strange shit.
And you could tell that it was definitely not like blurry vision or anything like that. It wasn't you duplicating things with your eyes. I'm speaking from, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. Well,
on mushrooms, how you can fuck with your eyes.
That's the great thing about the Marfa Lights viewing center, is that people are out there. Like you're never going out there and you're alone. That's everyone
awesome.
else is seeing this shit too.
It's that fucking common. That's crazy.
And I had my girlfriend as a trip sitter. You know, always
that's very smart.
Safely. So she did lose me for a minute while I was out there in the desert, but
that's allowed.
All turned out okay. But yeah, no, there was a crowd of people around who also were seeing these lights do it. You know, it's quite a strange phenomenon. In Brown Mountain in the Carolinas, you have the Min lights in Australia. I'm actually researching, and hopefully next year going to be on the ground investigating a case of these kind of lights with a lot of high strangeness associated in Namibia in South Africa.
Wow, man.
So it's one of these phenomenon that pop up again and again and again and again. And in ancient history, they're ghosts. In Brown Mountain, the lights were considered the lanterns of ghost Apaches looking for their dead husbands because a battle had taken place on that slope. In Marfa, it's the ghost of Aztecs or guarding their gold hidden in those hills. Of course, until it comes to modern times, and there's all kinds of UFO stories associated with them. The Marfa lights, again, seem to nowadays act more like UFOs than ghosts. Brown Mountain has a crazy story of a dude being taken inside the mountain and seeing an underground base filled with UFOs, and he even took back a dead mummified alien with him, and supposedly kept it in this storefront somewhere around Brown Mountain. And was like, "Yeah, that's the alien I found." He had this little mummy, and no one knows where that alien is today. It's disappeared, lost to history. But
No
again,
one
the
wanted
story,
to die. Oh my god!
well, yeah, it's, again, like the damn Betz Sphere. No one was thinking to catalog these things.
Yeah, posterity.
Maybe J. Allen Hynek has it too.
Probably. We should ask his son.
His basement is like the end of Indiana Jones, just filled with all these missing
Archive
UFO
boxes.
But yeah, it shows that the story again evolves and it meets our expectations in a certain extent.
Yeah.
And so through my research into this island and into this home, so it has the old Red Eyes, it has the Indian burial ground, it has the Spanish battles, the plantation era. So then the turn of the century arrives, the Gatsby Gilded Age, and Fort George Island turns into this golf course kind of hangout for the Jacksonville's elite. They build the Ribault Club after the French explorer, but it's where the Jacksonville socialites go and hang out and have cocktail hour and, look out onto the water off the island. And you can still visit the Ribault Club today, as well as Kingsley Plantation. And there's these sprawling oaks and Canopy Road. And there used to be a 9-hole golf course associated with it. And that's where Mellon Greeley, he was the architect who designed and built this club. He was known as the Dean of Jacksonville Architects. And while he was at this club one day, he met one Nettleton Neff, a railroad executive / engineer. He'd worked his way up from Chicago. And Neff wanted to build a summer home there on Fort George Island. And he had already bought a plot of land on what is now Mount Cornelia. And he had these like rough drawings of what the home he wanted the home to look like. And Greeley must have felt the essence and the idea of this home and came up with a second set of drawings and blueprints and said, "I think you should build this." And that was the house they ended up building. And it is a bizarre structure. It's this Tudor style. It really is more of a castle than it's a home. It's got this big conical tower as an entryway. To the left leads to this grand hall, really tall roof, big old fireplace. Leads out to a sunroom. There's 21 rooms in total, 3 stories. It has a basement, which is rare in Florida, but it's 4, but it has 7 different levels. There's all kinds of step ups and step downs and like shifting. It's very bizarre. It's almost kind of like a mini Winchester house. It's got very bizarre room placement and hallways and things like that. It kind of rises and falls with the slopes of Mount Cornelia.
Oh, weird.
Very strange home. But he builds this, but Nettleton Neff never moves in. Tragedy strikes the family. Like most ghost stories, there's something horrible at the genesis. First, Neff's wife dies in a fire on one of their properties in Michigan. The newspapers called the fires mysterious. No source was ever determined, but she perished. And soon after, their adult son disappeared from Harvard. He was there studying. He was gone for 2 weeks, and they found him hanging in an apple orchard. It was ruled a suicide. Soon after, Nettleton Neff took his own life too. He shot himself in his office in Chicago. And no one ever moved into the castle he had built, this kind of dream fantasy home. And at the same time, there were boxes moved in, but the family never moved in. And with those boxes sitting in there, the Great Depression hits. and the Reebok Club and this fancy golf course, they fall into decline, and there's no more Gatsby parties, and the forest and the swamp starts to swallow this island back up. And when you go today, you could never imagine there was a golf course there. If you walk on some of the trails, sometimes you'll come across this big patch of white sand, and that was one of those former sand traps. But if you hadn't been told what it was, you'd never even notice it.
Damn, I'm trying to look up the house right now. I can't find it.
You can find some pictures of it on my Instagram feed.
Oh, okay, cool.
I'll go back I got some good photos of it up there. I need to post some more this week.
I've probably seen it then. I didn't realize that we're, not making the connection. I'll have to go check it out on your Instagram later.
Yeah, at Chaz of the Dead for the listeners.
Absolutely.
But yeah, this really bizarre home. And so the photos you're going to see on that page are of it today. It's in a pretty rough state. Parts of it have collapsed. It's rough. But it still is bizarre when you look at it. It looks like it'd be more at home in a hillside in Bavaria than it does.
Oh yeah, it's the cover of your book, right?
This swamp in Florida. Yes, yeah, it's on the cover.
To cut you off, but yeah, I just made that connection. I'm a dumbass.
Smack dab on the cover.
There it is. So yeah, it does look more like a castle. It looks like something out of. So we have here in Massachusetts, we have this really weird place called Plymouth Plantation, where you go and it looks like the olden days, and that's exactly what this looks like. It looks like 1600s.
Yeah,
like old.
Oh yeah,
castle.
It's only a matter of time before the Tartaria guys sink their teeth into it.
Yeah, no shit. Right?
They're gonna pounce on it for sure because it fits it. It's bizarre. It's one of those places that it's out of time almost.
Yeah, so strange. Jacksonville's far more bizarre than I ever imagined.
Yeah,
my mother's from there.
An interesting place, that's for sure, in many different ways.
Yeah.
Just
my mother even told me that she remembers some vague story about like satanic cults in the area and shit like that. But then again,
well, there's all kinds of
and born again Christians and all that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah, anything that they don't understand is satanic.
That's for sure. Yes, absolutely.
But there is all kinds of satanic graffiti inside the house nowadays. There's a room I call the sacrifice room, where I actually recorded some pretty strange phenomenon.
That's wild.
But it's one of these rooms with a fireplace. There's a bunch of fireplaces in this. Again, it's a weird castle-like home. So a bunch of fireplaces. One of these rooms with a fireplace, someone spray painted sacrifice here, and there's a brick missing from the floor that leads into the basement, which is just filled with refuge. You can't really get down there. And so it's really spooky, really cleverly placed.
That sounds like such a fucking haunted house, man.
I had some weird experience, and I recorded some weird phenomenon in that room.
Like what was it?
But there was some strange EMF readings. In particular around that hole after testing out some strange ghost technology. But I'll get to that in a minute.
Oh, sure.
So this house gets built, and no one moves in, sits on this hill, and the island falls into decline. And so soon it becomes the spooky old house on the hill in the woods. And not long after, the ghost stories follow. Old Red Eyes is started to seen hanging out around there. These light spheres, again, the spheres of light, are seen hovering around the property and through the closed doors of the house. A phone is here ringing, even though it's not connected. An organ music is heard playing, even though there's no organ in the house. But again, it has that air. It looks like there would be. And people begin to hear and experience this strange phenomenon around the house. It becomes a place of like, I dare you to go there. I dare you to check it out.
Yeah. So for those viewing, that you guys can see it. For those listening, I'm sorry, you should watch this because these are some of the pictures that Chaz took.
God damn it! That's the second time.
What the fuck, man? That's just bizarre.
You can't do me like that.
That's terrible. I apologize.
So yeah, the house. it begins to collect these stories, and that's when it gets Jerry Betz's attention. She was talking about doing a film project, and they were like, well, you could film it out at this spooky house on Fort George Island, and it captures her imagination when she sees it. She renovates it. She adds this whole wing of the house, a wing that no longer stands. She even adds a new tower that also no longer stands. Adds a pool, really renovates this whole house. But that's during the time period where the Betz Sphere occurs. But before she even found this sphere, she experienced a lot of that paranormal phenomenon that other people, trespassers and whatnot, had been experiencing before her. On one night, she was hosting a dinner party, and there was this crash heard in the kitchen. And they went to the kitchen. The door was locked, unlocked it, and there was this shattered dish on the floor of the kitchen. But the cabinets were still locked. It had somehow teleported itself out and smashed. This kind of classic poltergeist activity. She had also seen the strange spheres of light on the property. She heard strange voices, and she always had a rational explanation for this. She was interviewed and asked about it, and she was like, yeah, no, the light spheres, yeah, we see those, but they're probably just phosphorus in the soil. Like
it's just swamp gas.
The voices, it's probably from boaters out on the channel, and their voices just echoing off the hill, and that's why we're hearing it. It's nothing. She was really this rational, again, very intelligent woman, not easily fooled, very clever in her industries, and and so all of this occurs, and then the sphere goes down, and no one makes the connection that, oh, this is happening in a haunted house. The sphere happens, and since it's metal, and
so it is metal.
That seems to be the only thing. Since it's metal, it becomes a UFO story, and it's been a UFO story for all of these years. And that's why I jokingly, I actually did pitch calling the book Haunted Balls, because there's a very good chance that this sphere was just became the focus of this activity. It became the vessel that this phenomenon was manifesting itself in.
And remind me, where did it where was it first spotted? Like, it's an actual physical metal object that just appears.
It was found just sitting on the island in a patch of grass on the island.
Right. Okay,
and
that's right. Yes.
Supposedly, the foliage around where it was sitting has never grown back.
Oh, okay. So I can see the total UFO connection there that people would run with immediately.
Right. Well, and then of course it is a sphere that moves on its own, and these spheres are seen very, very often in association to UFOs. And that was actually the third thing I found that made me decide that, someone needs to tell this story, because people are missing some details. There's a bigger picture here. So, and this is also a reason I ended up not wanting to call it Haunted Balls, because I'm not convinced that is the explanation. So you had this second case. You had the poltergeist ghost case on the house, the Neff house. Then you have the Betz Sphere case, which nowadays in our modern era of paranormal, we can acknowledge are the same case. Something of high strangeness is going on. And in my book, I dive into all the other high strangeness around the island, from entity sightings to sea creatures, sea monsters. You have the St. John's River monster, which was first seen off the shores of the island. You have Bigfoot creatures that associated with light spheres up and down the St. John's River. You can actually go and find a history of these light spheres. So
it's like a
high
hot spot
strangeness with them. Yeah, it seems to be one of these window areas, as some researchers refer to them, where the whole gamut seems to manifest. And that's why, again, those things like those weird phone calls they were experiencing and things like that.
Wow.
They seem, again, it seems like some John Keel stuff.
Right.
And it's very interesting that John Keel's Mothman prophecies were published that same year as the Betz Sphere, but a few months after the Sphere story had occurred. So none of the family, none of these people, if they were hoaxing it, they nailed it. They nailed all of these weird details of high strangeness and nailed it so well and are playing to the role so well that it's been 40 years and I'm the first guy who's brought it up. Because
that's nuts,
again,
man.
It's been this case where people are like, yeah, they found a weird sphere. It's probably a hoax. And that's been the end of the story. Well, the other thing I discovered, which really convinced me something more was going on, had to do with those recent Navy videos that were released in 2019. The famous Tic Tac video, the gimbal, and the Go Fast. Right. Hotly debated, the subject of much conversation. Are they real? Are they fake? What do they mean? Is it us? Is it China? Is it aliens? Lots of discussion going on. And I'm sure most, if not all of your listeners are familiar with the footage. The Tic Tac's the one that goes in and out of the water. It's from 2004. Very fuzzy. But that one's very famous because David Fravor, the witness, he was on Joe Rogan. He did the rounds, he did the whole promo. Then the next two are the gimbal, and this one is kind of the face of the footage, right? It's that black and white saucer that rotates. It's got the dome. It looks like a flying saucer. And the third is the Go Fast. Right. Now, both of those videos were filmed the same day in 2015. And the Go Fast shows a metal sphere, and it's hauling ass over the Atlantic Ocean, going real fast.
Yep.
What no one's brought up in all the discussion of these videos is that those two were filmed, and that Go Fast in particular was filmed only a few miles off the coast of Fort George Island. The naval station, the naval crew, they were flying a training mission off the USS Roosevelt, which was stationed at Mayport, the naval station that lies right to the south of Fort George Island. And judging by the direction that sphere is traveling in the Go Fast video, which shows a big metal sphere hauling ass over the ocean, it's heading in the direction of Florida, of the coast. And it's super bizarre that these are the famous videos, but no one's pointed out that not only did a sphere of the same description pop up 40 years ago in this exact same area, but the Navy, Mayport Station, the exact same naval station, had hands-on research. They had hands-on investigated this sphere. And so I looked into Mayport Station, and I discovered some information that even Hynek at the time didn't know. None of the investigators looking into this case, that Mayport Station, which again is just across the river from Fort George Island. It's literally could swim to it. It's right there. It had a history of UFO interactions before the Betz Sphere and after the Betz Sphere. The station before the Betz Sphere showed up had a flyover of a UFO where they scrambled jets in response. They had fighter jets deploy. The guards who were standing guard that night, they all got the talking to, like, hey, don't tell anyone about this, shut the hell up. And it was only reported to MUFON agents decades later, as like, oh yeah, I saw a weird thing, I'm sharing stories with my Navy buddies, and this was a thing we happened to us, and here it is. And it's kind of just a one-off for these guys, but it shows that this Mayport Station, like Groom Lake in Nevada, and all of these places that have this military history. This base has one as well. They've been interacting with these craft a lot more than anyone ever has even noticed. The fact that they filmed these two craft, these two famous videos now in this area while they were stationed at this base, starts to seem like a pretty crazy coincidence. When you consider that this station has had several very close calls and even one hands-on investigation into UFOs, and not just UFOs that look exactly like the two that were filmed that day.
Yeah. That's nuts, man.
It's bizarre. It's
Wow.
certainly bizarre. And you hear about these window areas and the phenomenon working on schedules happening on these kind of repeated timelines. And I wonder if there isn't a higher understanding of that at the military level. You know, we have all of this like, oh, they know, they have the craft, they know what's going on. And, you know, I've got my B theory. I've got a whole bunch of stuff which supports that idea as well. But perhaps they just know the schedule. They know these things are going to show up on at a certain amount of time, at a certain time of year, they're going to pop up. Maybe. And at least in this instance, I would say it's quite coincidental that they're able to intercept one of these spheres, at least on camera, after having such a long history involved with them.
Yeah.
There's even been the notion put forward that they did swap out the sphere, the Betz Sphere, and the Go Fast video was that sphere. It finally escaped. Someone like forgot to lock it down.
I was gonna say it got like, you know, reverse engineered maybe or something.
Burst out of the lab, and that's how they knew to film it. They were following it, filming it, and then when it met up with this gimbal craft, then that they started filming that one. Which is an awesome story. I hope that's true. That would be cool.
Yeah, you got to include this angle to this to the whole situation now. That's wild, man.
Yeah. Again, I'm not going to pretend like I know exactly what it means. It could be any of these things, but it certainly means something. It's a piece of information that we can't disregard when we're having conversations about these videos, which everyone wants to seem to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, regardless, you know, we didn't even know about it. I didn't know about it. This is amazing. This is a whole nother angle to it. I mean, and it's, of course, what you and I have talked about many times, the blending of these categories, these topics. It's all something to do. I would personally, I think it, you know, it goes back to consciousness being the root of all being and all that kind of fluffy, happy sounding stuff. But it seems more and more true as you look into these categories and these topics and how they interrelate all the time.
There's certainly a physical reality to what's going on with these craft. And, you know, there's a lot of speculation as, you know, deep fakes, is it, you know, psyops, and yeah, you can't really discount that. You know, I don't put anything past the government, when it comes to that stuff. But when you consider this information, I would say there's a high likelihood that that Go Fast video and that gimbal video are probably legitimate craft. Legitimate craft that they certainly filmed in color, by the way. There's absolutely better footage out there than the ones released. And I have some sources in some 3-letter places that have seen some videos that I've been told far surpass anything that's been released so far. Some up close helmet cam and stuff like that. There's certainly a reality to this object, and if it isn't, if it is fake, they're duping their own people. They're really hard.
And you know, you can follow that thread, and like it does speak to compartmentalization, right? I mean, that's a fact. And you know, who among the ranks, but you know, in the lower classes of society, in their eyes, whatever, like just because you're a soldier or something like that doesn't give you the right to, you know, see behind the curtain or anything like that. But that's just playing one side of it. I mean, the other side of it is that, as you said, they kind of they know when they're going to happen, perhaps aware of the cycles. I mean, we can relate that directly to, you know, they being very aware of cycles on this planet, I think. And I think that is what is happening when it comes to like astrotheology and other things like that, where it's like they're just aware of cycles that occur, and a lot of these cycles probably impact consciousness on a mass scale in some cases. So we do these ritual, who knows, you know, we can go down many rabbit holes in that direction.
Well, there's certainly some involvement, and that's, you know, no big break to anyone. The military's lying to us,
right? No
shit.
I
think we all
they
know
putting
that.
actors in our faces. Yeah, no shit.
I think we're all aware.
Yeah.
To some extent that's true. But when it comes to, and I also want to say I'm no Lou Elizondo apologist. I think that really when it comes to those big names, I think that's where you're more likely to find your psyops. When it comes to
Absolutely.
guys like Lou and
Lou's
even
a
Bob Lazar.
Yeah, both. They played two very important roles. One of which is the nerd, the innocent nerd, and and I'm not trying to be cruel or rude to him, but in general, that is the archetype, and that whole culture has been being pushed to the top of the creative food chain, I guess you could say, or the cultural food chain in Silicon Valley and everything. And on the other end, Lou Elizondo is like, the old man's hero. He's like the American patriot. He's like the regular guy you're gonna have at the weekend barbecue, dude.
Military, It's one of those
as
ones
fuck.
where, like, I don't even need to see your credentials, bro. I believe you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like,
no, you don't even have to tell me.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like he's one of those guys. You look at him and you think that those like phrenologists in the 1800s, where they would measure the size of your skull and tell you if you were like a warrior or not. They might have been onto something.
Yeah,
because
dude.
that guy's as military as hell. And here's the thing:
he's everybody's football coach in high school.
Well, that tells me, and because I was there.
Right.
That tells me he knows how to follow orders.
Absolutely.
And that's the only thing I can say 100% you can tell about a person like that. And so what those orders we don't know.
No, we really don't. I think we suppose so much. They have just like all they have, and they, of course, is this elusive they, but there seems to only ever be really just like one little fragment, one little puzzle piece that's missing from a situation. That's all that's missing. And from that void, we, the people, come up with extraordinary claims. And we don't know what the motives really are for anything. It's really humbling when you think on that level, right? It's like, oh my God.
Absolutely. and that's the truth of it, is you only need like one or two Lou Elizondos or Bob Lazars to just say some stuff, and then the community will take it from there. You don't even got to do anything. We'll discredit ourselves. We'll be like, leave it to the professionals. We're writing a new Star Trek.
Absolutely.
We're gonna go crazy. Reptilians versus aliens.
Ike paved the way,
Battle for our souls.
Yell it in a giant stadium, and the youth shall follow and do the same. So I don't know. That's divisive because I love alien stories and I'm super into it too. It's just I'm so skeptical lately, and I'm not trying to be, but man, there's so much that I see. A lot of weird names thrown around a lot. I see like Anunnaki get thrown around. And I'm like,
oh yeah,
all right, well, but that word is like a very specific cultural word, and there's just so much. And I'm not saying I have the answers, but it's like I feel like we have so many blanket statements being placed on things in this.
I've got a side trip for you, man. I'm gonna send you some readings, some free literature from the Church of Discordia. To kind of help revise your viewing of these things, because it really is, and I'm gonna get some hate in the comments on this one, but it really is that biblical framework that's fucking up a lot of this research. It's really hindering us as we move forward, and it's wild that we can recognize that as a society and like science. Like, the church held science back for a really long time. We can recognize it in some areas. I'm gonna push back on the art one. Art's definitely gotten worse, but like painting and shit. But writing and things like that was held back by the church. Education. We recognize that the church as a whole, as an institution, has held back these things that today we take for granted as liberties. For whatever reason, the paranormal has remained the stronghold of the church. It is one of those fields where even these super young kids who doing ghost hunting YouTube channels, millions of views, and they're independent Ghost Adventures episodes. I love it. It's cool. It's awesome. But
I
you
see 'em
still have
too.
they'll grab their
Yep.
cross necklace and be like, "There's a demon."
Yeah, because they all
And
watch Supernatural and they all want to be Sam and Dean Winchester. Like those, I love them too. I literally watch them some nights while I'm just like sitting back, like playing video games. I'll
See, I'm an X-Files man. Give me that sexual chemistry tension. I need
They're
that
fun,
in my
but-
paranormal mysteries.
Damn right. No, I totally agree. I don't want to hear White Snake anymore.
Enough corn. Let's leave the Christian rock version of paranormal behind. And it's like fine to have your own beliefs and your own practices, but the problem is that the field on a whole has been so tainted by it, where it even bleeds into things like the exopolitics, where the Pleiadians are just angels, man. Like they're
absolutely.
in most cases, in the friendship case, in my first book, we talked about it. They all had the names of angels. They chose angelic names.
Right.
They're doing Ancient Aliens Bible version, and
Absolutely.
it's the Anunnaki, fallen angels. They're the Greys or the reptilians, depending on who's telling the story.
It's comforting. It feels very comforting, I think.
Right, yeah, because
you
you
get something that you threw away back. I bet these are all like former atheists. You know what I mean? Like, we kind of get our faith back. It's just
that's true.
Super sci-fi, just like the culture has provided over the past 70 years.
And well, they do sound like born again Christians or like Scientologists, where they're like they've got a line and they're sticking to it, and they're
we've talked about it. The Atlantis stories drive me nuts. Those
are the funnest though.
The interdimensional, like the very sci-fi fantasy adventures of Atlantis that you hear about. It's like, I mean, I'm not opposed to
I love the
I just have
one
such
where
a human view.
They started having sex with dinosaurs, and so God destroyed the Atlanteans.
That's fantastic. That's
Loved
awesome. I mean, now granted, I'm not opposed to like, taking that sentence or that story or whatever and putting it on a wall and going, okay, where's the symbolism? What is this story trying to say?
Right. Well,
that's probably the route I'd take.
And a lot of the paranormal, a majority of it, and the reason why a lot of people are so bad at it is it's more of the study of belief than actually believing in a thing. And that's really hard to do, especially if you believe in a thing. And that's why I'm going to send you some Discordia literature, because it's more, they're more like thought experiments about breaking you out of that framework. And Discordianism was put together by some acid heads in the 60s. It's like this weird new age, not new age because it's I don't know. It's hard to describe. All I'm going to say is Hail Eris, goddess of chaos. And it's one of the key symbols in the occult practice is it's the yin yang symbol, but the dots on the inside are replaced with, on one side, a pentagon, which represents order, and on the other side, a golden apple, which represents chaos. And that comes from the Greek legend of Troy, right? The gods were having a party. They didn't invite Eris because she's the goddess of chaos, and she's a crazy bitch. She's gonna fuck up the party somehow. If she shows up, she's gonna do something crazy.
Right.
So being peeved that they didn't invite her, she gets this golden apple, and it's again that apple imagery. But
obviously, oh yeah.
And she writes Callisti on the side of it, and that means for the prettiest. And she tosses it over the wall into this party. And immediately all the goddesses start fighting over the apple. Who's the apple belong to? And long story short, they go down to Earth and they ask a human, and yada yada yada, the Battle of Troy for like 2 decades. It's it leads to Odysseus and the Odyssey, and it leads to all of these crazy actions just when Eris tossed an apple. She did absolutely nothing. And that's the power.
It's always a woman just doing something very simple and innocent with an apple.
These bitches, and that's part of mythology of Discordianism is that Eris is a fickle bitch. Like, like she's a cunt sometimes,
That
but then
sounds
other times she gives you shit. So it's this weird rephrasing. So the apple represents chaos, and then the pentagon represents order, right? And so if you're playing a fantasy game, order usually means good and chaos usually means evil, lightning. But the Pentagon, I think, is a beautiful choice for that symbol, because to any American citizen, when you think of the Pentagon, you think of a very specific image in a very specific entity. And it's not an entity of good. It is an entity of order, right?
Absolutely.
Every drone strike is signed off by a lawyer first. Someone sitting in office who's a legal professional is like, yeah, you can kill those civilians.
Yeah, his name was Barry. He was a lawyer.
Yeah, he signs the thing, stamps it. It's a system of order that is pretty evil on the whole, right? We could have free healthcare and free education and shit if we just got rid of that.
Right.
It isn't a good thing on the whole. And that represents, again, and that seeing the lens through order and through chaos, and recognizing that either of those things can be good or bad. There's not a state of permanent evil or permanent good. And that applies to the paranormal. If a candle burns for a week when it should be out, while you're under siege, then it's a miracle. You get Hanukkah. But if you're in a haunted house and a candle starts doing some weird shit and like increasing in size and whatnot, oh, it's spooky, it's demons.
Right.
Something chaotic's happening, and then the lens of good and evil is always situational. It's always situational. And it's true with nature, right? You have order, you have the golden ratio, you have biology, there's rules to our existence, to our physics. But then you also have chaos. You have the universe. I mean, look out to the stars and look at the chaos around us. Right. Infinite worlds and infinite systems and stars, billions of land
micro
mass
to macro.
Yeah, that you can't even possibly comprehend. That's chaos.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
I just, you made me think of my friend's post on I just had my friend Brandy on this previous episode, and she posted this thing where it was the pendulum swing of polarity is an illusion. From the correct angle, you see its completion. It's spiraling, circling, never going from side to side unless you plant yourself at that angle. When you expand out from yourself, you'll see you're traveling through all of this. That's pretty cool. It just made me think of that, because it's like this good versus evil is always, this polarity is part of us, and we even misinterpret that entirely. Like the polarity is always there, because in this, I don't know, sphere of existence, this realm or whatever, that's a part of the physics or something, it seems. Right. It's like right into the consciousness. Science.
It's part of our survival drive. It's part of the lizard brain. And that's
contrast.
The part, right. That's the part that it's hard to break. And that's really the slip and bound of an occultist, where you start thinking of someone as a wizard, is when they break off, because the good versus evil thing, that's a lizard brain thing. And the idea of spirituality, of God and religion, that's a really higher order concept that isn't processed easily by the human meat brain. And when you attach it to a concept like good versus evil, well, then it becomes very easy to process. You can be like, okay, well, everything I do is good and therefore holy. And then anything else does is bad and therefore evil. And it's an easy way to process that piece of information. When you're able to sever that tether, you can really examine that concept. And that's what the Pope and shit do. They look at how rich they are. They don't believe in versus evil. They believed in doing good. They do a lot more good.
Absolutely.
That's not of their concern in the slightest. So it's not necessary. And so again, you don't really want to abandon morality. That's not the concept we're talking about.
Right.
But it's being able to look at these higher order things and recognizing that they're not dictated by lizard brain motivations, which good versus evil is. We think of it as high motivation, as this high struggle. But man, if you're a gazelle, those fucking lions are evil.
Yeah, damn right.
If you're a lion, the gazelles might even be good. You might even see them like how I feel about cows. Like a cow's a fucking awesome thing, and it's great. So all of that shit. There's no black and white when it comes to existence in this reality. It's all grays. And so why would paranormal phenomenon be any different? Why would it follow strict guidelines of good versus evil? But there's so here's another weird book to dive on into, and I stumbled on this one by accident at the public library. People, support your library.
Hell yeah.
Go there, check out a book. You know, it's great. And this one it's called The Theory of Nonsense, and it's by oh shit, I'm blanking on his name. Oh God, he's the near-death experience guy.
Raymond Moody.
Yes, Dr. Moody. Thank you very much.
Yes, I remember this book. Yeah. I never read this one, but
so this
I remember
one
him putting this.
It's not, if you're looking for crazy paranormal stories and stuff, buy my book.
Right, yeah. This is
more about like philosophy and how to think and shit like that. But I think if you're examining these phenomenon and things like that, it really is crucial, essential reading. And it's about eliminating this, or not eliminating, it's about redefining the concept of nonsense. Because most of us hear, you know, oh, that's nonsense. It's a dismissal, right? It means it's bullshit, it's fake. But the logical idea of nonsense, of a piece of information that doesn't make sense, is crucial. And once you understand that, you can really investigate stories of nonsense, the stories of exopolitics and things like that, because it's more about recognizing, well, okay, that information doesn't make sense. That doesn't mean it's not true. That can mean a variety of things. That means possibly that person is processing it in a way that doesn't make sense. That's incorrect. Incorrect logically doesn't necessarily mean it's incorrect factually.
Right.
And so it's about recognizing different forms of nonsense, and there's all kinds of cool experiments and shit in it, and like thought games to help you like reprogram your thinking into recognizing nonsense. And again, not being dismissive of it, because it's present in everything. We see it obviously in religion with lots of stuff. They put 2 of every animal on a boat. Nonsense. It doesn't work, right? We logically know that didn't happen that way.
Right.
But we also see it in science. The Big Bang, nothingness exploded into everything. That sentence logically is nonsense. It doesn't work. It's a contradiction. It doesn't
paradox.
If I'm grading you as a grammar teacher, I'm taking a point off.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? It doesn't play. And we use nonsense as placeholders for information that isn't tangible yet. And that shouldn't be dismissed as, oh, well, we can't understand it, that means it's fake. It's nonsense, it's fake. That's a huge mistake, because we know nonsense can become tangible. We look at alchemy to chemistry. Alchemy started with dudes in dungeons mixing strange sludges together and making up weird words. But now those weird words they made up are our periodic table. They are tied to physical substances, and they have combinations and effects that are essentially magical. You could kill a whole bunch of people. You could, create
a whole bunch.
Yeah, you can cure a whole bunch. It's this bizarre, tangible thing now, and it's like, oh, science is magic, whatever. But it really, when you think about where they're sitting, back where the alchemists were, these concepts were so far out there, they were nonsense. They were impossibilities. And that's kind of where we're sitting at with the paranormal. We're the alchemists in the dungeon, mixing weird sludges together and sifting through the nonsense, trying to find what's tangible and what's real and the next steps to creating sense out of the nonsense. So that's a really good book.
Yeah,
Check
sounds like
that
it,
shit
man.
out. Dr. Raymond
Dude, I
Rudy,
can't.
man, he's a trip.
Yeah, he is. I have had him on the show before. I had him on a
Oh,
big
wow, that's
round table.
awesome.
Actually, was part of the original Witness series that you had been a part
Oh,
of when we did
shit, that's
the near death
cool.
experience thing. Excellent talk. He was so awesome. Yeah, he's got a bunch of books. Everybody go check him out as well while you're looking up Chaz's stuff at chazofthedead.com and getting his books.
Yeah, well, I just love the research and I love the figures in the community like Dr.
Hell yeah.
Moody who are just genuinely researching it. You know, you've got a
Yes.
lot of people out there doing hit jobs, you know, from the skeptical side, and then you have a lot of people who are captured by their narrative. And maybe they're doing it maliciously, selling some bullshit. Dr. Stephen Greer. But sorry, something caught my throat there.
Yeah.
But maybe I do think a lot of them they're captured by their story. And it's something that I've been really kind of reconciling with, especially in the telling of this story and the potential ramifications and things like that. Is remembering that the story is the original psychedelic experience. You know, I'm out here doing weird experiments with physical psychedelics, altering my consciousness. But if you heard one of my stories today, if you pictured the Neff house in your mind while I was describing it, you went under a psychedelic experience. You had a shifting of consciousness. It's something that happens so every day to us, you know, every night in our dreams. Most times when we listen to a podcast or read a book, we take it for granted. We don't really recognize it. Right. But I've found that if you put stories, a spooky story on that list of paranormal evidence, that tier list I was talking about where lights were second from the top, the spheres of lights. Number one, right at the top, is the story. There's always a strange story. Even before a UFO incident occurred, there's usually a spooky story that predates it. The Pascagoula abductions is a good example. Two dudes taken by these weird robotic pointed head entities, hit with a purple beam of light, investigated by the police. There's dozens of books on the case. It's considered one of the best investigated abduction cases. The stretch of river it occurred on was the Singing River. And this, again, never mentioned in most of these books about the case. A couple of them touch on it. But the Singing River was named such because there was this strange ghostly song people hear that wafts off the water of this river. And they've been hearing it for hundreds of years. The French governor of Louisiana was the first to record it. And he said that his native guides told him that this tribe, they knew they were going to be invaded and killed by another native tribe. So instead of being subjected to slavery, they drowned themselves in this river chanting their death song, and that's the ghostly song people still hear. And it's this small stretch of river. It's exactly the location where these two dudes were fishing when they were abducted.
No shit.
The Mothman. That whole region was cursed by Chief Cornstalk. There's this whole legend of a curse laid by a native chief there. Skinwalker Ranch has the Uinta Basin legends. It's named after its originating story, right? It's named after
the native story. Yeah,
and I always thought that was
I
always thought that was poignant. I always thought that naming, whoever decided that was the name, knew their shit, because that's a key aspect. And again, a lot of times it's a story like the Marshall Lights or Brown Mountain. It's a story that starts as a ghost and evolves into a UFO.
Yeah.
And so most people think, oh, well, UFO, ghost, separate thing. Nothing to do there. But it's No, it's something going on. The phenomenon is evolving to meet our expectations.
Oh, yeah, that's
And
an interesting way to put
it's
it.
like chemistry. If it becomes real, if it's no longer nonsense in our minds, then it becomes real physically. And it's something we're going to have to contend with here. That's the nature
Oh
of this
boy.
reality.
Yeah, what's going to be our
Um,
consensus on this one, right? That's
uh-huh.
the scary part.
And I'm not a Stephen Greer. I don't think they're here for peace, love, and light. I think we might have to shoot them. And
Oh
we
man.
might,
You
we
never
might
know.
keep it in the back pocket.
Right. Just be prepared, right?
The fact that they're so preoccupied with our nuclear weapons leads me to believe that they might be a little scared, and they might have reason to be scared. It's like going over to someone's house and being like, you got too many guns here, you should get rid of some of these guns.
Right. What bothers me is that, benevolent or malevolent, they seem to, it kind of tells us, all right, well, if there's aliens and all these descriptions or possibilities, then it sounds a lot like other advanced planets are filled with very ego like behavior just as much as we are. And if that's the case, man, what does that say about us and progression? Or and I don't say that, it's almost rhetorical. It's like, what is this they that's so superior yet tries to save us or tries to destroy us? Like, get out of here. Like,
Oh
you know what I
yeah,
mean? Like, what is this ego?
yeah, that's
I'm
the
gonna save
religious
you.
bend.
Like, what is this? Say or
And it
destroy you.
seems
It's either way. It's the end is nigh, or let God save you. It's one or the other, and it's all such human behavior. I hate how human, or I don't know. Maybe I'm being a little brash with that. Maybe it's like, oh well, we are occupying behavior and we call it human, but it's not. I don't know. But
right. So it's the motives of these entities, I think, is truly mysterious. I think that remains elusive, and that part's really uncomfortable. That's the part where people have to, well, they're good or they're bad, and they've got to fall into that. And even intelligent people, I shit on Dr. Stephen Greer because I think it's funny, and I think he looks funny.
He's as funny as his little 7-inch skeleton alien that he can hang from his rearview mirror that he did a whole documentary
but there's a good chance that he is being roped along by actual entities, that they're taking him for a spin, because that's the MO of these entities. They're little fuckers. They like to fuck around.
The trickster gods, right?
Yeah, right. That trickster in the paranormal. That archetype that's really being embraced by a lot of investigators now. And because I think that's, whether or not it's true, whether or not there's some kind of trickster entity, Loki kind of guy, Eris, goddess of chaos, she is behind everything. But whether she's behind paranormal phenomenon directly or not,
she sounds like a lot like Sophia to me. It seems I got to look into this. I've never heard of this, but yeah, send all that literature my way, man.
Oh yeah, principally Discordia. I'm a pope. Anyone can be a pope in the Discordian religion.
Nice.
Apostles of Eris. Yeah, you can get a little card, put it in your wallet.
That's great.
But this shit, what was I saying?
I totally forgot.
God damn.
We've been going for 2 hours, brother. This is awesome.
Already, geez.
Yeah. I gotta put my kid to bed.
Okay.
Damn.
I'll wrap it up then.
Yeah, but hey, go ahead. I'll let you wrap up. But this was awesome. I really appreciate you coming on,
man. Yeah, so I guess to touch on back to the Betz case, total diatribe there. Awesome, loved it. But to touch back on there, I ended up doing some investigations inside the house myself. And I tested out some strange ghost code technology from this guy in the UK, Patrick Jackson, who's got this theory around these spheres, and that these UFO spheres are the sources of hauntings and things like that. Some really out there strange stuff. I'm not necessarily convinced, but it was the perfect avenue of research when it comes to the Betz house, a place with history of hauntings and of weird metal spheres. And so I went to the house and conducted some investigations, including one overnight. And some pretty strange stuff occurred when I played that device.
Nice.
But I'm gonna leave it as a teaser for the book.
Yes.
Go check out A Place Between Time and Space to hear the latest addition to the strange stories that is this house and this island, Fort George Island. From ghosts to UFOs to the current paranormal happenings out there. And that brings me to the most important thing I want to plug today is the petition to save the house, the Betz Castle, Neff House. It is, I think I mentioned earlier, it sits on government land. I had to sneak in to do my investigations. It's journalism, though, so I'm protected under the First Amendment. Woo! Is what I'm going to tell them. We'll see if that works.
Yeah, we'll see.
But I've also started a petition to get the house recognized as a historic landmark so it can be saved for future generations. So the story doesn't have to end here. And it's built by a famous architect, Melvin Greeley. Lots of his buildings are already historic landmarks around Jacksonville. Based on that alone, it's historic enough to be preserved. And then it has all these crazy stories on top of it. It sits inside a cultural park, and it should be recognized, preserved, and renovated to be included as part of our cultural heritage. So whether you're a Floridian who loves history or just a paranormal fan who loves haunted castles, please go click the link in the bio, the episode description here to sign the petition so we can get this house saved. The U.S. has so few castles. We got to save the ones we got. Come
Damn
on,
right.
guys.
I agree. Dude, walking around
Nearly
Europe,
100
man,
years
they've
old
held
now.
on to their castles in Ireland and England in some cases. So yeah, they're gone from here for the most part. But yeah,
It's
please
falling
send me
apart,
that link too, and I'll definitely post it in the show notes so people can go check it out and donate and try to help, or sign the petition. So yeah. Man. And please go to chazofthedead.com and check out his work. Man, thank you again so much for being here for, I think, time number 4, 3, 4, whatever. I don't know, one of those. I'm sure you'll be back at some point too.
Yeah, well, we're going to tally them up there.
Absolutely, man. Maybe we can convince Chaz at some point to, maybe we'll find something amazingly paranormal around my neck of the woods and he'll be enticed to come up to New England and hang out or something.
My brother is living up in Massachusetts now, so I'm overdue for a visit.
I think that might have to happen, brother. I could show you around. We can definitely go to one hell of a spooky fucking cemetery I can tell you about.
Oh, hell yeah. I'm always in.
All right, man. Everybody, thank you so much for listening, watching, checking it out. Go check out Chaz's work, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Deep Share Podcast. If you want to hear more, then hit that subscribe button. Follow me on all the social places. And remember, think for yourself, but don't always believe what you think. Till next time.
Human sacrifice, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria. Enough, I get the point.
You have meddled with the primal forces of nature. And you will atone.
What do we know? What do we know? If I know what we know, then I can tell you what we know, and if someone else knows, okay?